If it wasn't abundantly clear from looking behind me, Pokémon is a franchise that's really close to my heart, a franchise I adore, my one true love. It's everywhere. It was my entire childhood, and it's basically still my entire life now. I mean, hey, this is the third video in a row that has Pokémon as a focus. I mean, really, I may as well be a Pokémon YouTuber at this point. Back in the day, I was even picked on for liking Pokémon. You know, back when playing games wasn't cool, and you'd get picked on for liking pocket monsters. What was that, like, what, 12, 13 years ago? Oh my god, was it that long ago? Oh, I hate the passage of time. But as the years went by, it was cool to like Pokémon again, like some flip switched. And when 2016 rolled around after making a trip with a bud to the local game shop and picking up Pokémon Sun on launch day, I was the coolest dude in the room. Everyone was crowding around me, asking me about Pokémon Sun and Moon, reminiscing about the anime, talking about our favourite memories. I'd never felt cooler. The game was great too. I spent the next week no-lifing it until I got to Pony Island-ish, and I loved every moment of it. Gladion was sick, Tapu Koko was even more sick, and Toucannon was my boy. But even though I loved it, I actually ended up dropping it. I would do this a lot back then actually, drop games for basically no reason, especially when I got close to the end, which is bizarre to me. It was a bad character trait that I still carry a bit of now, but that's really besides the point. 9 months later, in the summer of 2017, I picked it back up, and I finally beat it. And I ended up loving the end of the game too. I lamented the fact that I stopped playing it and how I couldn't really have a full opinion on this game that I had dropped so long ago that I hardly remembered the story and the narrative of my playthrough. It's genuinely gotten at me forever, but recently I decided that enough was enough, and I finally played through Sun and Moon again, 9 years later. Which is actually kinda poetic because, well, I dropped it for 9 months, so that's kinda fun too. And boy am I glad I ended up playing these games because Pokémon Sun and Moon absolutely rock. The 3DS was a really interesting era for being a Pokémon fan, where X and Y came out with corners cut, all the while still being pretty good actually, all things considered. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire divide, I feel like, but to me, they're immaculate games that can do no wrong. And Sun and Moon build upon ORAS and are somewhat under-talked about in the grand scheme of the series. Sun and Moon came out around the end of the 3DS, and honestly, it's really obvious just looking at the game. From the start of the game, you can see that... Oh my god, oh that's weird. Huh. Anyway, it's filled with charm and oozing with life. This introduction is just so charming, and as soon as you get into the game, you're greeted to an incredible scene at sunset that just leaves you wondering, how the hell does this game run on a 3DS? Well, the answer to that one is barely, to be honest with you. But man, upscaled, this game looks like a dream. They could just release this onto the Switch right now and it'd be one of the best looking games on the system. The vibes in Sun and Moon are impeccable. The tropical vibe is abundantly clear from the get-go, and the art style and music really work in harmony to make it one of the nicest feeling worlds to just walk around in that I've ever experienced in a game. I'd often come back to Howley City to see this shot and hear the nighttime theme of the city again, just to feel something, man. Speaking of feeling things again, the 3DS Pokemon games are always so fun to play for me because of the gameplay of each of them. Mega Evolution is incredible in X and Y, ORAS is Gen 3, so I'm very happy to play that and be in that region whenever, really. And Sun and Moon is this refreshing take on the Pokemon formula while actually being rather similar to the traditional Pokemon format. The trials in Sun and Moon really do feel like they're trying to change the format massively, shaking up the traditional 8-gym format and the usual story structure due to how different they are to each other, but more than that to most gyms. The puzzles are more involved and generally longer than a lot of the gym puzzles, and they also don't revolve around battling trainers, only the Pokemon of the trial site itself, with some of them relying on puzzles and sparse battling like Mallow's trial. This sounds like such a minor difference in the grand scheme of things, but in reality it really makes each trial feel like a traditional dungeon in a sense instead of just the place you go to get story progression, which is what gyms can feel like at times. This tiny change structurally builds up the feeling like a massive shift, considering when we hit the main story sections, I was actually surprised at seeing them at that moment. Lillie being kidnapped and the culmination of the main story that ensued from that point onwards genuinely took me by surprise. The confrontation at Ether House was when I realised, oh wait, yeah, I guess we are one trial from the end, which is generally when the story happens in Pokemon, so yeah, this makes sense, I guess. Now, this is gonna sound like something I don't love about the franchise, but I swear it's not that, okay? You ready? Pokemon very rarely feels like a massive adventure to me. Yeah, I know. You can stop booing whenever you want, by the way, but please, just hear me out. I swear this is something positive about Sun and Moon. Maybe it's because I've played most of them 10 times, maybe it's because the structure's pretty rigid outside of a few entries, I don't know. But Sun and Moon felt like playing one of the grandest adventures I have ever been on, especially within Pokemon. I think only Scarlet and Violet really compare because of how open those games are, and that's an entirely different kind of adventure. In fact, it's literally the opposite of what Sun and Moon are. Instead of a hyper-focused game, they let you run off the leash immediately to do whatever you want, whenever you want. Alola's different islands had extremely different vibes from many of the areas, from places like Howley City to Seafolk Village to Paniola Town to Tapu Village. There's so many different vibes here, and dividing them up between different islands makes it feel like they're part of an adventure where you're journeying across a massive world, even if the region's diversity in this regard is similar to other Pokemon games. It also helps that Alola really did immerse me with its world building and lore, which really shines here. Legends of the Tapus defending each island, Ultra Beasts and Ultra Wormholes, the island kahunas and the trials being something inherently unique to the islands, and the region not even having a Pokemon League at the start of the game. It feels like a wholly unique place, and Pokemon as a franchise is generally really good at this. Unova feels different to Sinnoh, Sinnoh different to Galar, and even the two connected regions in Kanto and Johto really feel distinctly different. But Alola really pulled me in, and I think it was partly the vibes, partly the world building, but mostly it was the narrative and characters of Sun and Moon that really pulled me in. When it comes to games in general, I'm someone who loves story more than anything else. I love falling in love with a world, its characters, and being taken on the ride of my life through a good story. And my immense love for media like games and anime come mostly from the narrative elements of them. Pokemon as a franchise has had some incredible stories. I think the Gen 5, Oras, and in particular the epilogue of that game, and Scarlet and Violet are incredible in this regard too. When people talk about Sun and Moon though, they talk about the endless cutscenes, the slowest opening the series has ever had, with Melee being what is basically a tutorial island, and Nebby getting put back into the bag. Although to be fair, that last one does happen a lot. I love it though. But Sun and Moon's narrative, structure, and pace is what I fell for the most this time through. Back when I played it in 2016, I also thought it was slow, a bit long in the tooth, but generally still a good time. But this time through, as I've grown up since 2016, I appreciate the slower burns, the games that set a pace and continue along that for the entire duration of its run, and games that make you go on its terms instead of yours. I always think of the Persona games in this regard, where yes, everything you do on a daily basis is up to the player, and it's ultimately freeing as a player to have that much choice. But the calendar system, deadlines, and the general pace of the 100-hour-long story really makes you want to slow down and smell the roses. Even the loading screen in Persona 5 tells you to take your time, so this vibe is definitely intentional, and I absolutely love it. Sun and Moon do something similar, but in a completely different way. While there's not much gameplay freedom in Sun and Moon, it's probably one of the most linear Pokemon games actually, the way it makes you want to take the game slowly is that it basically sits you down and tells you, you are going to take this slowly by being in a cutscene every 5 minutes. Now, like I said up top, people see this element as a negative, especially in the early areas of the game, but I actually think it's kinda genius. Not only is the dialogue incredibly well written with characters you can't help but love, with gimmicks like Nebby getting into the bag that's absolutely adorable, the early sections doing this really hammers home the vibe the game wants to set. This much dialogue basically conditions you to take the game slower, take in the world at their pace, and play the game in a more meticulous way, if you ask me. And I think the fact that it does loosen up a bit after the first island is an indicator that this is kind of true, because it makes sense for them to want to front load the game with the tone and pace they want to set before entrusting that the player has gotten the message and is on board with it at that point. I believe the pacing of this game is incredible, and while what I've just said is a pretty big reason why I think that, the structure of the game, as I've also mentioned, really helps in making it feel like a brand new style of Pokemon game. It's just great! Pacing aside, another reason the story of Sun and Moon works so well for me is the characters within that story. Alongside being a narrative person when it comes to media, my favourite kinds of narratives are ones that involve good emotional character writing. Things like Love Live, Xenoblade 86, Final Fantasy VIII, there's a bunch. Pokemon can really excel at this too. Gen 5 is full of it, for example, Nemona, Hop, there's tons of it in the series. But as we're probably running into the ground at this point, Sun and Moon really excel in this regard. Not only do we have what is the strongest core cast of characters in Pokemon with the main squad, but the supporting cast are immaculate too. Kukui is genuinely one of the most fun professors, and his wife Burnett is a bundle of joy too. Even each of the trial captains and kahunas have their own charm and feel like a larger part of the game than the gym leaders of prior games. Probably because the trials are a bit longer than gyms, if I'm being honest with you. But a lot of them feel like characters who have a larger part of the story, and you see them outside of their trial period. It's just cool. And while they may not be exactly more fleshed out than prior gym leaders, it's kind of a facade. They feel like they are, much like how the trials themselves kind of make the structure feel like an entirely different thing when it's not that different really. Guzma, Plumeria, and Team Skull are even a fun evil team with an extremely simple mentality to just cause chaos on the islands. Sometimes the simpler an evil team, the better. Even Lusamine is a tragic villain with the pursuit of the Ultra Beast seeming like a simple bad person does bad things type of motivation, and while you don't really learn this through the main scenario of the main game, or at least as far as I could find anyway, she's pursuing after her husband who was sucked into Ultra Space a couple of years before the main game begins. And after encountering Nihilego numerous times, she starts to lose control of herself, assumedly because of the toxins Nihilego emits, which can control a person's emotions, leading her down the path she ends up on in the main game, having been an awful mother to Lillie and Gladion for the past few years. We know that at some point in the past, presumably before all of this happened, she was a loving parent who cared for Lillie and Gladion, but that changed suddenly, assumedly after Morn disappears and she encounters Nihilego. She ends up as a controlling person with an obsession with bringing everything she finds beautiful under her control, to care for them and become a mother to them, as seen with the Ultra Beasts and Pokemon in general. Ultimately, what she finds beautiful is just stuff that doesn't oppose her in any way, and eventually her children become ugly to her because, well, they don't want anything to do with the evilness that their mother is doing. She even dresses Lillie to look like a Nihilego and also dressed Gladion too. Although not as an Ultra Beast, and it's not exactly disclosed what Gladion's outfit represents, but he does seem to have a thematic similarity to Type Null in his outfit and design. So maybe there's something there too. Speaking of them, Lillie and Gladion are the absolute core of this game's story and are easily my favourite parts of the game. Gladion himself is someone that comes off as abrasive and harsh, seeming to not care for his Pokemon and such. But really, beneath the spiky exterior, he cares deeply for Pokemon, his sister, and is generally a really nice guy. He's just a tsundere, and that's so good. Over the course of the game, he grows from being a lone wolf to being someone who ends up being friendly with the main squad and even employs their help and relies on them at the end of the game. His growth is really cool, and he's one of my favourite characters in the series, with one of the best themes in Pokemon too. Song just absolutely rocks. Gladion's just cool as hell, there's not much else to say. Sometimes things really are just that cool. Also, Type Null rocks, and the fact that after you start to befriend him and his facade slowly fades, his Golbat evolves into a Crobat, which is something that can only happen with friendship, showing he cares for his Pokemon. That's cinema, baby. But my favourite character in the entirety of Pokemon belongs to another character in this game, which is something I didn't see coming at all. Lillie is a character I've always been fond of. I love Umphy-coded characters, and Lillie is probably the most Umphy-coded character in the entirety of Pokemon. And the conclusion to this game where she leaves for Kanto is probably the thing I remember the most about the game from when I played it initially. But this time round, Lillie as a character absolutely blew me away, man. Not only because of the reasons listed above, but with her journey throughout the game, trying to find herself and gain independence from the life she'd been living for the past however many years. Throughout the game, we get so many glimpses of her inner struggle, with her mentioning how she's dressed by her mother in one of your first interactions with her, and at other times throughout the game. Lillie is a docile character, someone who's clearly very nervy, anxious, and scared of the big wide world. This is thanks to Lusamine's controlling nature and has rendered her incredibly sheltered and scared of doing anything that her mother doesn't approve of. She ultimately wants her mother to love her, but is terrified of and appalled at what she's been doing and what she plans to do, so she takes a big step when leaving the Ether Paradise at the start of the game, marking her first act of independence. Building upon that, when she begins to travel with the player character, she starts to broaden her horizons and see the world for what it truly is, which is beautiful. She begins to find herself and starts to live for herself instead of whatever Lusamine has always had planned out for her. I'm always a big fan of characters who have arcs like this, characters who are shy, anxious, and don't know their place in the world and end up finding themselves along the journey. It's something I feel like a lot of people can relate to, including myself. A lot of my favourite characters fall into this subgenre of character, where they're either seemingly determined but under the surface are unsure of their path, or start with obvious struggles and throughout the course of the story overcome them to find themselves and their path in life. A character lacking confidence and learning to become someone they're proud of over the course of a story is genuinely one of my favourite things in media, and Lillie is an amazing example of one of these characters. Her journey throughout the story of Sun and Moon moved me to tears multiple times, and I've only ever cried at a Pokemon story once before this. And for the record, I cry a ton at stories. I don't want to make it sound like I don't cry at all. I'll cry at anything, a good anime ED, even excitement. It's honestly really funny sometimes how much I cry at some random things. Throughout the game you can see her grow, with one example being her relationship with Pokemon. At the start of the game she doesn't like Pokemon battling due to the Pokemon getting hurt, but through watching you and your Pokemon coexist and become closer, she learns that people and Pokemon enjoy battling together, and the coexistence between people and Pokemon in battle is a give and take. While the Pokemon may be getting hurt, it's never pushed too far so long as the trainer cares for their Pokemon, which Celine and company do. This change in her worldview is in part thanks to her relationship with the main character and how well the main character treats Pokemon over the course of the main story, as well as seeing more of the world and how people and Pokemon work together. Her arc goes from great to amazing when you get to the Ether Paradise section of the game. From there onwards, the story sections with Lusamine really let Lillie come into her own, and after her kidnapping, she's determined to talk sense into her mother and bring her back from the edge of ruin. The scene following on from the initial confrontation with Lusamine in Ether Paradise, where Lillie reveals her Z-powered form, it's just pure cinema. I love it. Her decision to then chase after what she wants in the world genuinely moved me, and the game from then on becomes an incredible journey with Lillie trying to push herself to greater heights, gaining confidence and resolve throughout the last leg of the journey. Things like crossing a bridge sounds like a silly little thing in the grand scheme of things, but for Lillie it's a massive moment, and it's a massive moment in the game too, overcoming her fear from the events at the start of the game where she was attacked by Spearow on a bridge. The scene on Executor Island where Lillie talks about her appreciation for the main character and how they've taught her that you can always do something. It made me a blubbering mess. Her declaration in that scene to become a Pokemon trainer is something so moving too, especially after the journey she's been on in the game with you. Lillie is genuinely one of my favourite characters ever after this playthrough, and is the reason I wanted to make this video. She's so well written, so umphy, and the best character in Pokemon. Pokemon Sun and Moon in general have blown me away this time around. I was not expecting to walk away from this game with it being an all-timer for me now. There were games I initially enjoyed but didn't even finish for 9 months, and to come back 9 whole years later and play them for the second time and fall in love has been, well, it's been an amazing experience. The region itself feels so alive, and I know that's a cliche, but it's true. It's rare I spend the duration of a Pokemon game talking to the various NPCs around the game and making sure I exhaust all of the dialogue with the main cast of characters, but Sun and Moon did that for me this time around. And if I'm being completely honest with you, I might continue to do that for every Pokemon game I play because it enriched the experience so much that I can't help but feel like it'll enrich every other Pokemon game I play too. I spent so much of Sun and Moon utterly in awe of it, whether that was the graphical style of the game to the vibes, the music, and even the fact that there's 2 black and white cameos in the main story for some reason, which is the coolest thing for a Gen 5 lover like myself. I also enjoy that Z-moves are a pretty big part of the combat and the story, but not really pushed upon you too much. You collect Z-crystals going around the trials, sure, but it felt more like a background gimmick in comparison to something like Dynamax and Terrestrialization. It's more like Mega Evolution in that sense, where it's a part of the story, but it's not a focal point of the game at every turn, and honestly, I think I prefer it that way. But obviously, as I've discussed, the main story being so good is what has let Sun and Moon become a set of games that are going to make me have to replay Gen 5 to see if Sun and Moon or Black and White 2 are my favourite games in the series. The main cast being so good sets a backbone for the game to build off of narratively, and it does that with aplomb. It has been a magical time to play through Sun and Moon, and I can't wait to go back to Ultra Sun and Moon eventually to see if they can somehow be better than Sun and Moon. Which I'm doubting, but I'm open to it. I don't know how you can get much better than this though. Anyway, until next time, go and pick up a game you originally dropped. You might experience peak like I did. And until then, I'll be seeing you around.